You're nothing to us." The words echoed through the living room like a slap across my face. I stood there, clutching my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter, watching my husband Greg and his mother exchange knowing looks. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of trying to conceive, and this was how it ended, with his family treating me like a defective appliance they wanted to return. My name is Julia Monroe. I'm 37 years old, and I had always believed that love could conquer anything. I met Greg at a coffee shop in San Diego 6 years ago, where he charmed me with his easy smile and stories about his family's maritime business. His parents, Robert and Patricia, had built Clearwater Shipping from nothing, and Greg was being groomed to take over. When we married, I thought I was joining a family that valued loyalty and commitment. How wrong I was. The fertility struggles began almost immediately after our wedding. Month after month, the pregnancy tests came back negative. At first, Greg was supportive, holding my hand during doctor visits and reassuring me that it would happen when the time was right. But as the months turned into years, his family's patience wore thin. Patricia started making pointed comments about fulfilling wifely duties, and Robert would grumble about needing grandchildren to carry on the family legacy. The final blow came 3 weeks ago during Sunday dinner at their sprawling oceanfront estate. I had just finished helping Patricia serve dessert when she announced loudly, "Maybe it's time Greg considered other options. There are plenty of younger women who could give our family what it needs." Greg said nothing. He just stared at his plate while his father nodded in agreement. That night, I knew something fundamental had shifted in our marriage. This morning's confrontation was the culmination of weeks of cold shoulders and whispered conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. Patricia had called me into the living room with Greg and Robert, her expression stern and unwavering. "Julia, we've been more than patient with you," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But facts are facts. You can't give us grandchildren, and this family needs to move forward." I felt my world crumbling as Greg finally spoke up, though not in my defense. "Mom's right," he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "We can't keep pretending this marriage is working." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. The man I had loved, supported, and stood by through everything was choosing his parents' approval over our vows. As I stood there, absorbing the weight of their rejection, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. My reflection looked smaller somehow, diminished by years of failed attempts and growing resentment. But there was something else in my eyes, a flicker of determination that surprised even me. Little did they know, this moment would mark the beginning of my transformation, not my destruction. Growing up in a middle-class household in Phoenix, I had learned early that love required work and sacrifice. My parents, both teachers, had shown me what a supportive partnership looked like. When my father was diagnosed with cancer during my senior year of college, my mother never wavered in her devotion. She worked 2 jobs to pay for treatments and still found time to sit by his bedside every evening. Their love story ended when he passed away 2 years after my wedding, but their example had shaped my understanding of commitment. I met Greg during a particularly difficult period in my life. I had just started working as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit organization, trying to rebuild my confidence after a string of failed relationships. Greg seemed different from the men I had dated before. He was ambitious but kind, successful but down to earth. When he talked about his family's business, his eyes lit up with genuine passion. He painted pictures of a future where we would travel the world together, where our children would learn to sail on the family yacht, where love would be the foundation of everything we built. The early years of our marriage had been genuinely happy. Greg was attentive and affectionate, surprising me with weekend getaways and small gestures that showed he was thinking of me. His parents had welcomed me warmly, or so I thought. Patricia would invite me to ladies' lunches and ask for my opinion on family matters. Robert would regale me with stories of building the business from a single tugboat to a fleet of cargo vessels. I felt like I had finally found the family I had always wanted. The first cracks appeared during our second year of marriage when I still wasn't pregnant. Patricia's questions became more probing, more invasive. "Have you been tracking your cycles properly?" she would ask during family dinners. "Maybe you should see a specialist. Time isn't on your side, you know." Greg would squeeze my hand under the table, but he never asked his mother to stop. Looking back, I realized that was when he started choosing their comfort over mine. As the months passed, I threw myself into fertility treatments with the desperation of someone trying to save her marriage. I endured hormone injections that made me weep at commercials, invasive procedures that left me feeling violated, and endless appointments that consumed my days. Greg attended the early consultations, but gradually found excuses to miss them. Work became his refuge, and I was left to navigate the medical maze alone. The emotional distance grew wider with each negative test. Greg started working later, traveling more frequently, and speaking to me in the polite but distant tone he used with business associates. His parents became increasingly critical, questioning my diet, my stress levels, my commitment to the process. They began treating me like a failing employee rather than a daughter-in-law, and Greg allowed it to happen. Now, standing in their pristine living room with its panoramic ocean views, I understood that my worth to this family had always been conditional. I was valued only for what I could produce, not for who I was. The realization was devastating, but also strangely liberating. If they wanted to treat me like nothing, then perhaps it was time for me to disappear. The packing process was surreal in its efficiency. Patricia supervised while Robert and Greg watched from the doorway, as if I might steal something on my way out. Everything I had accumulated during 5 years of marriage fit into 2 duffel bags: clothes, books, a few photographs, and the jewelry my grandmother had left me. The expensive items Greg had given me during our courtship somehow didn't feel like mine anymore. The diamond earrings from our first anniversary, the pearl necklace from our wedding day, the designer handbags he bought during business trips. They all belonged to the version of me that had believed in this family's love. "You can take the Honda," Greg said quietly, dangling the keys to my old car. It was a 2018 model with over 100,000 miles, hardly a generous gesture considering the luxury vehicles sitting in their garage. Patricia sniffed disapprovingly, as if even this small concession was too much. "She should be grateful we're not asking for the ring back," she muttered, though the engagement ring had already been returned during our argument. As I loaded my bags into the trunk, I caught sight of neighbors pretending not to watch from their perfectly manicured lawns. The humiliation was complete. Julia Monroe, the woman who couldn't give her husband children, being evicted from paradise. I wondered how Patricia would explain my sudden absence to her bridge club, what story Greg would tell his business associates about his missing wife. The drive away from their estate felt like escaping a beautiful prison. As I navigated the winding coastal roads, I forced myself not to look back at the house where I had spent the last 5 years trying to prove my worth. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, and I had to pull over twice to compose myself. The reality of my situation was sinking in. I was 37, unemployed, and essentially homeless. My savings were modest, my job prospects uncertain, and my confidence shattered. But somewhere between the tears and the panic, something unexpected happened. As I sat in my car overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching waves crash against the rocks below, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, no one was monitoring my cycle, analyzing my diet, or scheduling my life around fertility appointments. I was free from their constant judgment, their suffocating expectations, their conditional love. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for someone who might offer a couch for a few nights. My friend Monica from college lived in Los Angeles, about 3 hours north. She had always said I was welcome any time, though I had never taken her up on the offer. My finger hovered over her number as I tried to figure out how to explain that my marriage had imploded and I needed help starting over. As the sun began to set over the water, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rebuild my life, stronger and better than before. They had called me nothing, but I would prove them wrong in ways they couldn't imagine. Monica's apartment in West Hollywood was a far cry from the oceanfront mansion I had called home, but her warm embrace when she opened the door was worth more than all of Patricia's cold hospitality. "Oh, honey," she whispered, holding me as I finally broke down completely. "Tell me everything." Over wine and takeout pizza, I spilled the entire story. The fertility struggles, the family's cruelty, the humiliating dismissal. Monica listened without judgment, occasionally refilling my glass or squeezing my hand. "You know what?" she said after I finished. "This might be the best thing that ever happened to you. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but that family was toxic, Julia. You deserve so much better." Monica had always been perceptive, even in college when she warned me about various boyfriends who would later prove unworthy. As a successful talent agent, she had developed an excellent radar for people who used others for their own gain. The first few weeks were a blur of job applications, apartment hunting, and trying to piece together a new identity. I had defined myself as Greg's wife for so long that I barely remembered who Julia Monroe was on her own. Monica let me stay as long as I needed, but I was determined not to impose forever. I found a small studio apartment in Silver Lake and landed a position with a marketing firm that specialized in nonprofit organizations. The salary was modest, but it felt good to be valued for my skills rather than my reproductive potential. 3 months after leaving San Diego, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was feeling unusually tired and nauseous, symptoms I initially attributed to stress and my new work schedule. When the feelings persisted, I bought a pregnancy test more out of paranoia than hope. The positive result left me staring at the plastic stick in disbelief. After 5 years of trying, countless medical interventions, and the complete destruction of my marriage, I was finally pregnant. The irony was overwhelming. The child Greg and his family had desperately wanted was growing inside me, but they would never know. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, to shove this miracle in their faces and demand an apology. But another part of me, the stronger part, recognized this as an opportunity for something better. This baby would be mine, free from the toxic expectations and conditional love of the family that had rejected us both. I scheduled an appointment with an obstetrician and began the surreal process of navigating pregnancy alone. The doctor was kind but clinical, asking about the father's medical history and whether he would be involved in the child's life. "No," I said firmly. "He won't be involved." I didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. This was my choice, my child, my future. As my pregnancy progressed, I threw myself into planning a life that would give my baby everything I had learned was truly valuable. Unconditional love, emotional security, and the freedom to be exactly who they were meant to be. I read parenting books, researched child development, and began setting aside money for a college fund. Monica helped me convert a corner of my studio into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow since I had decided to wait until birth to learn the baby's gender. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Morning sickness lasted well into the second trimester, and I often felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of raising a child alone. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the alternative, raising this child in an environment where love was contingent on meeting impossible standards. My baby deserved better than that, and so did I. By my 6th month, I had begun to envision a future that excited rather than terrified me. This child would know their worth wasn't tied to what they could produce or achieve. They would understand that real family was about unconditional support, not manipulation and control. As I felt the first strong kicks against my ribs, I whispered promises about the life we would build together, far from the people who had tried to convince me I was worthless. Lucas James Monroe was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, and the moment I held him, I understood what unconditional love truly meant. He was perfect in every way that mattered, healthy, alert, and absolutely mine. The nurses commented on his striking green eyes and thick, dark hair. features that strongly resembled Greg's. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness that his father would never know this incredible little person. But it quickly passed. This was better. Lucas would never have to earn love or prove his worth to anyone. Monica was my birth partner, holding my hand through contractions and crying almost as hard as I did when Lucas finally arrived. "He's gorgeous," she whispered, taking photos while I counted his tiny fingers and toes. "Greg doesn't know what he's missing." I had thought about the genetics often during my pregnancy, wondering if Lucas would look like his father or me. The resemblance to Greg was unmistakable, but it didn't bother me as much as I had feared. This was my son, and his father had forfeited any claim to him when he chose his parents' approval over our marriage. The early months of motherhood were challenging but deeply fulfilling. I had taken maternity leave from the marketing firm, and Monica's flexible schedule allowed her to help with Lucas when she wasn't traveling for work. We developed a routine that felt sustainable. I would work from home part-time while Lucas napped, and Monica would take evening feedings when she was in town. It wasn't the traditional nuclear family I had once imagined, but it was filled with more genuine love and support than I had ever experienced with Greg's family. During Lucas's first year, I began working on a project that had been percolating in my mind since leaving San Diego. The fertility industry was worth billions of dollars, built partly on the desperation of women like me, who believed their value depended on their ability to conceive. I started writing about my experiences, the invasive procedures, the emotional manipulation, the way society treats women who struggle with infertility. What began as personal therapy evolved into something larger. I reached out to other women who had faced similar challenges, collecting their stories and weaving them into a broader narrative about how the pressure to procreate can destroy relationships and self-worth. Some had eventually conceived, others had chosen adoption, and still others had found fulfillment in child-free lives. The common thread was that they had all been made to feel inadequate by systems and people who reduced them to their reproductive function. The manuscript grew into a book proposal, which I sent to literary agents while Lucas played on the floor beside my desk. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 agents wanted to represent me, and within weeks of signing with the best one, publishers were bidding on my memoir. The advance was substantial enough to provide financial security for Lucas and me, but more importantly, it validated that my story, our story, mattered. As I signed the publishing contract, I thought about Greg and his family. They had no idea that the woman they had discarded like defective merchandise was about to share her story with the world. They had no idea that their cruelty had inspired something powerful and profitable. Most of all, they had no idea that the grandchild they had desperately wanted was thriving without them, surrounded by people who loved him simply for existing. Lucas was 15 months old when the book was scheduled for publication. By then, he was walking, babbling constantly, and charming everyone he met. Monica had become his honorary aunt, and my small circle of friends had expanded to include other writers, single mothers, and women who had found strength in shared experiences. We had built something beautiful from the ashes of my broken marriage. The book launch exceeded everyone's expectations. Invisible Worth, A Woman's Journey Beyond Fertility, debuted at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list and sparked conversations across social media platforms. I appeared on morning shows, podcasts, and panel discussions about women's health and societal expectations. The story resonated with thousands of women who shared their own experiences of feeling reduced to their reproductive capacity. What surprised me most was the response from men. Husbands wrote to thank me for helping them understand their wives' struggles. Fathers apologized for pressuring their daughters about grandchildren. Even some fertility doctors reached out to discuss how the industry could better support women emotionally, not just medically. The book had tapped into something universal about how society values women, and the conversation was long overdue. Lucas accompanied me to several book events, charming audiences while I spoke about rebuilding life after betrayal. He was 2.5 now, full of energy and curiosity, with Greg's green eyes but my stubborn determination. People often commented on how well-adjusted he seemed, how confident and secure. I knew it was because he had never experienced conditional love, never been made to feel that his worth depended on meeting someone else's expectations. During a book signing in San Francisco, I met David Wellington, an investment banker who had attended my talk about financial independence after divorce. He was recently divorced himself, with a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie. Our conversation over coffee stretched into dinner, then weekend visits when Sophie stayed with him. David was everything Greg hadn't been: emotionally available, genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams, and absolutely wonderful with Lucas. The relationship developed slowly and naturally. David never pressured me for commitment or tried to replace Lucas's father, which was perfect since Lucas had never had a father to replace. Instead, he became a friend, then a partner, creating space for all of us to grow together. Sophie adored Lucas, treating him like the little brother she had always wanted, and Lucas worshipped her in return. A year into our relationship, David proposed not just to me but to our little family. "I want to build something beautiful with all of us," he said, getting down on one knee in front of both children. "Will you marry me? And will you two be my kids?" Sophie and Lucas both shouted yes before I could even answer, though my tears had already given away my response. By this time, my second book was in development, a guide for single mothers navigating entrepreneurship and dating. The success of my first book had opened doors I never could have imagined. I was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and corporate events about resilience and reinvention. A production company had optioned the film rights to my memoir, and I was consulting on the screenplay. Lucas was 3 when we planned our wedding, a small ceremony on the beach in Malibu with only our closest friends and chosen family. Monica was my maid of honor, and Sophie was our flower girl while Lucas served as ring bearer. As I stood on the sand watching David promise to love and protect all of us, I marveled at how far we had traveled from that devastating day in Patricia's living room. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to marry into another successful family, but this time everything was different. David's parents were warm and inclusive, welcoming Lucas and me without reservation. They didn't care about his biological father or my fertility history. They cared about kindness, character, and the happiness of their son. It was everything I had hoped Greg's family would be, back when I still believed love could be earned through perfection. As we planned our future together, I occasionally wondered what Greg was doing, whether he ever thought about the wife he had discarded so callously. But those thoughts came less frequently now, replaced by excitement about the life we were building, and gratitude for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from my darkest period. The yacht party was David's idea. His investment firm was celebrating a major acquisition, and he had suggested hosting the celebration on a friend's luxury vessel moored in San Diego Harbor. I had mixed feelings about returning to the city where my marriage had imploded. But I was no longer the broken woman who had driven away 5 years earlier. I was a best-selling author, a confident mother, and the partner of a successful man who valued me for exactly who I was. We arrived at the marina on a perfect Saturday afternoon in June. Lucas, now 3 and fascinated by boats, clutched David's hand while pointing excitedly at the massive yachts bobbing in their slips. Sophie walked beside me, chattering about a book she was reading for summer camp. We looked like exactly what we were, a happy, successful family enjoying a beautiful day together. David's colleague had spared no expense for the celebration. The yacht was magnificent, with multiple decks, elegant furnishings, and a crew serving champagne and gourmet appetizers. As we boarded, I felt a surge of pride in how far I had come. 5 years ago, I had been dismissed from a similar world of privilege and wealth. Now I was returning as an equal, not seeking approval or acceptance, but simply enjoying the fruits of my own success. Lucas was immediately entranced by the water, pressing his face against the deck railing while David held him securely. "Mama, look at all the boats," he exclaimed, his green eyes sparkling with wonder. Other guests smiled at his enthusiasm, and several commented on what a delightful child he was. These were David's colleagues and friends. people who knew our story and supported our family without reservation. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself relaxing completely for the first time since arriving in San Diego. The past felt distant and powerless, unable to touch the beautiful life I had built. I was chatting with David's business partner about my upcoming book tour when I noticed a familiar yacht pulling into a nearby slip. The distinctive blue and white hull of the Patricia's Dream was unmistakable. It was Greg's family yacht, the one I had sailed on countless times during my marriage. My breath caught as I watched 3 figures disembark. Even from a distance, I recognized Robert's distinctive silver hair and Patricia's rigid posture. And there was Greg, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. They were dressed for a day on the water, but their body language suggested this wasn't a pleasure cruise. Robert appeared to be arguing with the marina staff about something, his face flushed with frustration. As if drawn by some cosmic sense of irony, Greg looked up toward our yacht at the exact moment I stepped to the railing with Lucas in my arms. The distance between us was perhaps 50 yards, but I could see the precise moment recognition dawned on his face. His expression shifted from casual observation to shock, then to something that looked almost like fear. Patricia followed his gaze and immediately went rigid. Her mouth opened slightly, and she grabbed Robert's arm to get his attention. Within seconds, all 3 of them were staring at us. Greg's former wife standing on a luxury yacht, holding a child who bore an unmistakable resemblance to their son, accompanied by a man who radiated success and confidence. "Mama, why are those people staring at us?" Lucas asked innocently, his voice carrying clearly across the water in the harbor's acoustics. Several of our party guests turned to look, including David, who immediately understood the situation. He moved to stand beside me, placing a protective hand on my back while Sophie joined us at the railing. "Just some people I used to know," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "They don't matter anymore." But even as I spoke, I could see the wheels turning in Patricia's mind. The child's age, his features, the timeline. She was doing the math, and the results were clearly devastating. Greg took a step toward us, as if he might call out or try to approach our yacht. But David's presence beside me, solid and unmistakably protective, seemed to stop him. This wasn't the broken woman he had dismissed 5 years ago. This was someone who had not only survived his cruelty, but had thrived beyond anything he could have imagined. I smiled then, not with malice, but with genuine contentment. I had everything I had ever really wanted: love, security, family, and success that I had earned through my own strength and talent. They had given me nothing and taken everything. Yet here I stood, clearly happier and more fulfilled than they could ever be. Without a word, I turned away from the railing and rejoined our celebration, Lucas giggling in my arms while David whispered something that made me laugh. Behind us, I could feel their eyes still watching, but their gaze held no power over me anymore. I was exactly where I belonged, with people who loved me not for what I could produce, but for who I was. The psychological impact of that moment would ripple outward in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Within hours, the literary and social media worlds would be buzzing with speculation. Within days, Greg's business would be facing scrutiny it had never experienced. And within weeks, the full consequences of their cruelty 5 years earlier would become devastatingly clear. But for now, in this perfect moment on the deck of a beautiful yacht with my chosen family around me, all I felt was peace. The girl who had once believed her worth depended on other people's approval was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned that the best revenge was simply living well. The confrontation at the marina was just the beginning of Greg and his family's reckoning. Within days of our encounter, photos from the yacht party began circulating on social media, with several guests posting about meeting the best-selling author Julia Monroe and her beautiful family. The images showed me laughing with David, Lucas playing happily on deck, and all of us radiating the contentment that comes from genuine love and mutual respect. Greg's attempts to reach out were clumsy and desperate. He called my publisher, my agent, even Monica, trying to get a message to me. When those efforts failed, he showed up at one of my book signings in Los Angeles, only to be escorted out by security when he became disruptive. The incident made local news, with reporters quickly connecting him to the abusive husband featured in my memoir. His family's shipping business began losing contracts as corporate clients distanced themselves from the negative publicity. Patricia's social standing crumbled as word spread through their elite circles about the grandson they had unknowingly rejected. The very women who had once envied her perfect family now whispered behind her back about the child who bore such a strong resemblance to Greg, raised by the woman they had cruelly dismissed. Robert's health declined rapidly under the stress, and the family business that had been their pride for decades was eventually sold to competitors at a fraction of its former value. Greg's personal life fared no better. The young woman he had married 6 months after our divorce left him when the scandal broke, taking their infant daughter and half of his remaining assets. He became a cautionary tale about the dangers of choosing status over love, a man who had possessed everything that mattered and thrown it away for his parents' approval. As I watched my son chase waves on the beach near our new home in Carmel, I reflected on the unexpected turns that had brought us here. They had tried to break me by telling me I was nothing, but their cruelty had instead revealed my true strength. In losing everything I thought I wanted, I had discovered everything I actually needed. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't destroying them. It was building something so beautiful that their absence became irrelevant. They had set me free to become the woman I was always meant to be, and for that, perhaps I should have thanked them.